The jungle world of Veralia had no name in the council archives. It was simply marked as uncharted, dangerous. Dense green clouds swirled in its atmosphere. Lightning flashed across its skies. And somewhere beneath the endless canopy, predators moved like shadows. The galactic exploration fleet had arrived anyway. They were looking for resources, technology, and glory. Among them was Captain Aria Vance. She was known for her courage, for leading missions no one else dared, and for coming back alive when everyone thought she wouldn't. But bravery was not enough to make her popular. Some envied her success. Others hated her blunt honesty. And one man, Commander Koran, hated her more than anyone. The mission began smoothly. The fleet landed near a wide river, their silver shuttles glinting in the pale sun. Teams spread out, scanning for minerals and strange energy readings. Aria's job was to take Shuttle 17 and chart the northern sector. Koran's voice came over the comms before she left. "Careful out there, Captain," he said, his tone mocking. "Wouldn't want you getting lost." She ignored him. The jungle was beautiful, but deadly. Massive trees twisted together. There, roots rising like walls. Vines hung low, dripping with glowing blue sap. Strange bird-like creatures screamed overhead, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Inside the cockpit, Aria kept her scanners running. She didn't notice the small red light flashing under her console, the silent alarm that the shuttles. Stabilizers were failing Doc. By the time she realized something was wrong, it was too late. The engines coughed. The shuttle lurched sideways, diving toward the canopy. "Mayday, mayday," she shouted into the comm. Static answered. Branches tore. At the hull, the impact threw her forward. Darkness swallowed her. She woke hours later to the smell of burning metal. Her head throbbed. The cockpit glass was shattered, letting in thick jungle air. Every movement sent pain through her ribs. "Fleet Command, this is Captain Vance. I've crashed." "Request immediate pickup," she said, activating her beacon. Nothing. No voice, no confirmation. Just silence. Her hand tightened on the comm. She tried again and again. Still nothing. That's when she understood. They had heard her. They had chosen not to answer. By the second hour, the jungle began to change. The bird cries faded. The wind died. The air grew heavier, filled with the sound of distant, rhythmic thuds, like giant footsteps, but not quite. Then came the first. Howl. It rose from deep in the forest, sharp and long, carrying over the treetops. It was followed by another, and another. Her heart pounded. She had heard that sound before, not here, but in whispered stories among soldiers and scouts. The apex hunters, they were said to be the deadliest, predators in the Orion arm. Fast, silent, intelligent. Entire hunting parties had vanished after encountering them. No one had ever seen one and returned to tell the tale in full. Aria checked her sidearm. The charge pack was half full. She scavenged a flare from the emergency kit, slung her bag over her shoulder, and stepped out into the wreckage's shadow. The jungle floor was soft, damp with moss. Her boots sank slightly with each step. She didn't have a plan, just one goal: keep moving. If she stayed in one place, she'd be cornered. But the hunters were not chasing her. Not yet. They were following, watching, testing. She caught glimpses. A shadow slipping between two trees. The flicker of movement above. Her in the branches. Once she saw claws, long and curved, gripping a trunk before vanishing again. The sun dipped lower. The green light of day faded to blue. By the time darkness settled, she had found a small hollow under the roots of a giant tree. It was just big, enough for her to crawl inside. She wedged a sheet of broken hull plating across the opening. It wasn't much, but it made her feel less exposed. The jungle stayed silent for a long time. Too silent. Then, without warning, the silence broke. Leaves rustled, branches creaked, and from all directions the glowing began. Dozens of eyes lit up in the dark, pale yellow, steady, unblinking. They moved slowly, deliberately, circling the tree. Arya gripped her sidearm tighter. She could hear their breathing now, low, deep, in perfect rhythm. They weren't charging. They weren't retreating. They were surrounding her. Her thoughts raced. She could fire. She could run. But neither would end well. She was injured, outnumbered, and deep in their territory. Set of eyes moved closer. Then another. She could see their shapes now. Tall, lean, built for speed and strength. Their skin seemed to ripple in the faint light, patterns shifting like camouflage. A low growl rolled through the hollow, vibrating in her chest. It was not a warning. It was a statement that she was prey. And yet, they didn't attack. They just stood there, staring, as if waiting for something. The growl faded. The jungle fell silent again, except for the sound of her own heartbeat. That was when she realized the truth. The apex hunters weren't here to kill her. Not yet. They were here to decide whether she was worth killing at all. Cliffhanger. The closest pair of eyes blinked once. And then another shape landed behind her without a sound. She turned, and the last thing she saw was teeth. Arya woke with a start. It was still dark. The jungle above her was a wall of shadow, the faint glow of alien plants barely enough to see by. She was lying in the same hollow under the roots, but the sheet of hull plating she had used as a barricade was gone. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't moved it. She sat up, sidearm raised. The night was quiet, too quiet. Even the insects had stopped. Then she saw a dot just 3 meters away. Sitting on its haunches like a wolf at rest was one of the apex hunters, its yellow eyes locked with hers. Its body was lean and muscular, covered in a hide that shimmered, with shifting colors, one moment blending into the roots, the next showing deep black stripes. It didn't attack. It didn't growl. It just watched. Slowly, she moved her hand toward the flare in her bag. The creature's head tilted slightly, tracking her every motion. She yanked the flare free and struck it against the root. Light burst out, bathing the hollow in red fire. The hunter flinched, but didn't retreat. From somewhere in the distance came a second howl. Low, drawn out. The hunter's head snapped toward the sound. Then, impossibly fast, it was gone. It didn't run, didn't leap. It was just no longer there. Arya's breathing slowed, but the fear stayed. She was in their territory now. They knew where she was. They could come back at any time. She had 2 choices: stay hidden and hope for rescue, which she knew wasn't coming. Move. She chose to move. She started north, deeper into the jungle. Every step felt watched. She could sense them, not in front of her, not behind her, but around her, always just out of sight. Once she spotted 2 moving together above her in the branches, following her silently. Another time, she found a massive paw print in the mud, so fresh that water was still filling in the edges. By midday, her body ached from the heat and the effort. She found a small stream, knelt to drink, and froze. Across the water, 3 apex hunters stood side by side. They were larger than the one she had seen earlier, their eyes narrow, their heads low. One of them stepped forward. It carried something in its jaws, a chunk of metal. Her eyes widened. She recognized it instantly. It was from her shuttle. The hunter dropped it into the stream with a splash, then turned and walked away. The others followed. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. We know everything about you. That night, the howls were closer. Arya climbed into the fork of a tall tree, wrapping herself in a thermal blanket. She tried to sleep, But the jungle never rested. At some point, she heard footsteps below, slow, deliberate. She peered down through the leaves, and her stomach tightened. 4 hunters stood beneath the tree, looking up at her. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes, those eyes studied her like a puzzle. One of them climbed halfway up the trunk before stopping, claws sunk deep into the bark. It didn't come closer. Instead, it stared at her for what felt like minutes before. Dropping silently to the ground, they melted back into the dark, leaving her alone. By the 3rd day, her food rations were running low. She knew she couldn't survive long without a plan. That's when she saw it, a mark carved into a tree trunk. Not random scratches, but deliberate shapes. 4 lines crossing a circle. A trail marker. She followed it. Soon she found another. Then another. The markers led deeper into the jungle, into an area where the trees grew impossibly tall and the air shimmered with strange heat. The ground here was littered with bones, not just animal bones, but metal scraps, shattered armor, pieces of weapons from dozens of different worlds. This was no ordinary hunting ground. It was a trial ground. She didn't notice the hunters at first, but when she did, her chest tightened. They were everywhere, in the trees, in the grass, in the shadows, watching her silently. One stepped forward, larger than the rest, its hide, a deep crimson black, scars crossing its face. It carried no weapon, but it didn't need one. The leader moved toward her slowly, its gaze never breaking. The other hunters closed in a wide circle, cutting off escape. Arya didn't raise her sidearm. She knew it would be useless. Instead, she stood still, every muscle tense. The leader stopped just 2 meters away. It looked at her, studied her. Then, without warning, it lunged. She dove aside, rolling in the dirt as claws sliced through the air where her head had been. The other hunters roared, the sound shaking the ground. This was it. Not a kill, but a test. The leader came again. She dodged, grabbed a broken branch, and jammed it into the ground as a barrier. The leader smash. The jungle was quiet again, not too quiet. Arya crouched low, the broken fang gripped tightly in her hand. The faint moving light in the distance still pulsed through the trees, slow, steady, like it was looking for her. She moved toward it carefully, weaving between the thick roots. Every step was deliberate, silent. Her instincts screamed that she was being watched. Not by the hunters this time, but by something else. After 10 minutes, she reached a ridge and peered over. Below her, half hidden, under vines, was a stone circle. Each stone was taller than a person, carved with deep lines and symbols that seemed to shimmer when her eyes passed over them. At the center stood the apex. Hunter leader, the crimson black one, waiting. Around him, 8 other hunters stood, in a perfect circle, their heads low. But that wasn't what made her freeze. In front of the leader lay a pile of objects, pieces of alien armor, ceremonial weapons, and skulls, dozens of them, from species across the galaxy. The leader looked up at her and gave a low growl. It wasn't a threat. It was a command. Come down. Arya slid down the ridge slowly, never lowering her eyes from his. When she reached the circle, the hunters parted, letting her step inside. The leader gestured with his head toward a spear lying at the center. The shaft was black wood, the blade a strange green metal that seemed alive. Her pulse quickened. She understood now. This was no ordinary meeting. This was a trial by hunt. The leader gave a single roar. The sound rolled across the jungle like thunder. One by one, the other hunters melted into the trees, vanishing from sight. Arya stood in the center of the circle, clutching the spear. The leader stepped aside, clearing a path into the jungle. It was the start of the trial. She was prey now, and she would be hunted until dawn. The first attack came minutes later. A shadow dropped from above, claws slicing the air. She spun, thrusting the spear upward. The hunter twisted mid-her and landed silently in front of her. Eyes bright with challenge, it circled her slowly, then darted forward again. She sidestepped, using a fallen log as a barrier, and jabbed with the spear. The blow glanced off its hide. She realized the truth. This wasn't about killing her. It was about testing her, if she fought without fear. If she adapted, she might live. The second hunter came from the left, its movement faster than a blink. She barely managed to duck under its claws. The jungle erupted in sound, growls, snapping branches, the pounding of heavy footsteps. They were coming in waves now, forcing her to move, to think, to strike and retreat. She used the terrain to her advantage, climbing trees, leaping over streams, using vines as cover. Every time a hunter came too close, she aimed for sensitive spots, the eyes, the jaw, the underbelly, but she didn't kill. She could have, once or twice. But something deep inside told her that killing a hunter here in their trial would end badly. Hours passed. Sweat soaked her uniform. Her arms ached from holding the spear. She had cuts on her face and arms. Her muscles burned, and her breathing came in ragged bursts. Then the jungle fell silent again. She knew that meant one thing. The final test. The leader stepped out of the shadows. Alone, they circled each other. Eyes locked. He lunged first, claws flashing. She sidestepped and struck, the spear's blade cutting a thin line across his arm. He didn't slow. His movements were like a storm, powerful, relentless. She dodged, rolled, ducked under a swipe, and drove the spear into the dirt to vault over him. Her chest heaved, her vision blurred from exhaustion, but she stayed on her feet. Finally, in one desperate move, she feinted left, then spun right, bringing the spear up under his chin, stopping just short of his throat. They froze. The jungle held its breath. The leader's eyes narrowed. Then, slowly, he stepped back. From the trees, the other hunters emerged. They surrounded her, but their stance had changed. No longer tense, no longer aggressive. The leader reached up, tore a fang from a necklace of bone around his neck, and pressed it into her palm. She understood. She had passed, but before she could speak, the light she had seen earlier returned, brighter now, flooding the jungle in cold white beams. Through the trees came figures in black armor, carrying rifles. They moved with precision, scanning the ground. Not hunters, not part of this world, and one of them spoke into a comm unit, his voice sharp. "Command, we've found her. Move in." Arya's stomach dropped. She knew that voice. It was Commander Reth, the man who had sabotaged her shuttle. The hunters tensed, their growls rising like thunder. The leader looked at her, then at the soldiers approaching. She realized the truth in that moment. This trial had ended, but a much bigger hunt was about to begin. Cliffhanger for part 4. The soldiers raised their weapons, aiming at both her and the hunters. The leader steps forward, placing himself between her and the rifles, and lets out a roar so loud it shakes the trees. The white beams of the soldiers' searchlights cut through the jungle mist, painting sharp lines across Arya's face. Apex hunters stood like living shadows at her side, their glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. Every muscle in their bodies was tense, ready to spring. Commander Reth stepped into the clearing, his black armor gleaming under the lights. He looked exactly as she remembered. Cold, precise, dangerous. "Captain Vance," he said, his voice calm but edged with amusement. "You've been a hard woman to find." Arya kept her grip on the spear. "You didn't try very hard." Reth smirked. "We weren't looking to rescue you." He glanced at the hunters with thinly veiled disgust. "But you found something valuable. These creatures." Imagine what they'd fetch in the right hands. The leader of the hunters, the crimson-black one, took a step forward, his growl deep and resonant. The other hunters moved with him, their claws glinting in the light. Reth raised a hand, signaling his men. Fire if they move. Arya's heart pounded. She knew exactly what would happen next. One wrong twitch and the clearing would explode. In blood and gunfire. "I'm not going with you," she said firmly. Reth tilted his head, almost amused. "You don't have a choice. You've been declared missing in action. That means you're dead, Captain. Dead women don't refuse orders." The words hit her like ice. He'd made it official. Even if she somehow returned to the fleet, she would be erased. The leader of the hunters gave a low, almost questioning growl, as if asking her permission. Arya's mind raced. If she said yes, they would fight. If she said no, Reth would take her and probably slaughter the hunters. She took a deep breath. "Do it," the jungle erupted. The leader lunged forward with terrifying speed, his claws slicing through the nearest. Soldiers rifle like paper. 2 hunters dropped from the trees, dragging armored men into the shadows before they could scream. Reth's voice rang out, "Shoot them! Shoot them all!" But the hunters moved faster than the soldiers. Could Arya fought alongside them, using the spear to knock rifles aside and disable targets. She wasn't trying to kill, not yet, but she made sure every blow counted. The hunters fought like liquid shadows, slipping between beams of light, striking from angles the soldiers never saw coming. One soldier turned to fire at Arya, only to vanish into the undergrowth with a strangled cry as a hunter tackled him. Reth, still untouched, stepped back toward the trees, pulling a sidearm from his hip. His eyes never left Arya. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," she replied, stepping toward him. "I'm correcting one." He fired. The plasma shot missed her by inches, scorching the bark behind her. She charged forward, using the spear's shaft to knock the pistol from his hand. The leader appeared beside her, his growl vibrating through the ground. Reth looked at the hunter, then at her. "You think you've won? The fleet will come for this planet. They'll burn it to the ground." The leader snarled, his eyes narrowing. But instead of striking, he looked at Arya, as if waiting for her decision. She glanced at Reth, then at the jungle around them. "No," she said. "We'll be ready." The leader let out a sharp call, and in moments, dozens more hunters peered from the shadows. Some carried crude weapons. Others had scars that told of battles fought long before this night. Reth's face changed, not to fear, but realization. "You've allied with them," he said slowly. "You've tamed the apex hunters." Arya stepped closer until she stood eye to eye with him. "No, they chose me." 2 hunters grabbed Reth by the arms, dragging him to the stone circle. The leader gestured toward the carvings on the ancient stones, speaking in deep, rumbling tones. Arya didn't know the words, but she understood the meaning. Blood for blood. Betrayal demands judgment. She put a hand on the leader's arm. "Not yet. He's more valuable alive. He's the warning we'll send back." The leader studied her for a moment, then nodded. The hunters bound Reth and carried him into the shadows. Arya followed the leader deeper into the jungle. They walked for hours, through terrain she had never seen before. Cliffs covered in glowing vines, rivers lit from below by strange bioluminescent fish. Finally, they reached a vast clearing. At its center was a towering structure of stone and metal, half buried in the earth. The air around it hummed with power. The leader gestured toward it, his voice low. Arya stepped closer and felt the hair on her arms or eyes. She didn't understand the technology, but she knew one thing. This was old. Older than the hunters. Older than the galaxy's oldest empires. "This," she whispered, is why you guard this world? The leader nodded once. She realized the truth. The hunters weren't just predators. They were protectors. This jungle wasn't their hunty. The night sky burned with falling fire. Dozens of drop pods punched through the clouds, glowing red from the heat of entry. They screamed overhead, shaking the jungle with each sonic boom. Arya stood on a high ridge, the apex hunters around her, like living statues. The leader, the crimson-black hunter, crouched beside her, his glowing eyes locked on the incoming invasion. "They're coming fast," she muttered. "Faster than I hoped." The leader gave a low, rumbling growl that seemed to echo through the ground. In response, the jungle itself came alive. Shapes moved in the shadows. Claws scratched against stone. Hundreds of hunters emerged from the mist, each one armed with spears, blades, and jagged throwing spikes carved from bone. Far above, in the darkness of space, the fleet hung like a wall of steel. Their commander's voice boomed over the invading. "Soldiers comes, burn the jungle, leave nothing standing." The first drop pod slammed into the earth with a thunderous crack, splitting apart to release squads of armored troops. They moved in formation, rifles glowing, scanning the undergrowth. They never saw the first trap. A soldier stepped forward, and the ground beneath him collapsed, sending him tumbling into a pit lined with sharpened stakes. Another soldier raised his rifle, but a hunter leapt from the treetops, landing on him with bone-crushing force. From the ridge, Arya watched the chaos unfold. "Now," she said, a sharp, piercing call rang out from the leader. In an instant, the hunters vanished into the foliage, melting into the jungle like shadows in smoke. The soldiers advanced cautiously, their lights sweeping through the mist. Then the jungle struck back. Vines snapped like whips, yanking soldiers into the trees. Spears flew from the darkness, striking with deadly precision. One soldier turned to fire, only for a hunter to appear behind him, silent and sudden, ending the fight before he could scream. Explosions erupted as tripwire triggered mines. Old tech from a forgotten war detonated beneath the soldiers' feet. Arya had discovered them weeks ago and worked with the hunters to repurpose them. The commander's voice crackled over the comms again, now with a hint of frustration. "Push forward. They're just animals." But the deeper the soldiers pushed, the more the jungle turned against them. Paths they thought were clear closed behind them. Sounds of movement surrounded them from all sides, yet nothing appeared in their lights until it was too late. Arya moved through the chaos like a phantom, striking quickly and disappearing. She had no heavy weapons, just a spear and the hunters. Silent coordination, but she knew how to break their formation. At one point, she locked eyes with a terrified young soldier, barely more than a boy. He hesitated, rifle shaking. She stepped aside, letting him run. She wasn't here to slaughter. She was here to make sure they would never return. By midday, smoke curled into the sky from burning troop carriers. Entire squads had been wiped out without a single open field battle. The jungle's whispers grew louder, the hunters' hunting calls echoing from everywhere, making it impossible for the enemy to tell where the next strike would come from. But the fleet wasn't finished. From orbit, massive gunships descended, their engines shaking the ground. These weren't soldiers. These were machines, built to burn and clear entire forests. One opened fire, torrents of plasma ripping through the canopy, igniting trees in seconds. The leader looked to Arya. "We hold them," she said, gripping her spear. "We hold them here." The hunters moved fast, splitting into teams. Some darted into the burning sections to lead the fire toward preset barriers of damp logs and clay, slowing its spread. Others climbed the massive gunships like insects crawling on metal, ripping into weapon mounts and tearing at power lines. Arya herself ran straight toward the largest gunship. Plasma bolts scorched the ground around her, but she kept moving. She reached the landing strut, leapt, and drove her spear into the nearest vent, jamming the cooling system. The ship shuddered, overheating, and its plasma fire sputtered out. Inside the cockpit, the pilot cursed. "She's here. She's on the—" The leader appeared beside her, claws cutting through the metal like paper. Together, they tore into the cockpit, forcing the pilot to eject. The gunship, uncontrolled, veered sideways into the trees and exploded. In a blast of fire and shrapnel, the surviving soldiers began retreating toward their drop pods dot from the ridge. Arya could see them, tired, wounded, and beaten. She didn't need to give the order. The hunters knew. They let them go, because this was never about killing them all. It was about sending a message dot by nightfall. The jungle was quiet again. Fires burned in the distance, but the heart of the forest still stood, untouched. The hunters gathered in the stone circle, their eyes reflecting the flames. Reth knelt in the center, still bound. His uniform was torn, his pride shattered. "You can't win," he said, his voice low. "The galaxy will keep coming." Arya stepped closer, her shadow falling over him. "Ben will keep sending them back in pieces." The leader handed her a new weapon, a spear tipped with black crystal, its surface etched with the same markings from the ancient stones. She understood the meaning without words. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a title. She was now their war leader, cliffhanger. For Part 6, far above the planet, the fleet still waited. But instead of preparing another assault, they broadcast a single message to the galaxy. "Do not enter this world. The apex hunters have a queen." The jungle was silent, not the silence of death, but the silence of victory. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and burned metal. High above the canopy, the enemy fleet hung in orbit, unmoving. They had stopped sending troops. Word had already started to spread. 3 days after the battle, a single transport ship descended from the sky. It did not come armed. It landed on the same clearing where the first drop pods had arrived, its ramp lowering with a hiss of steam. Out stepped a galactic envoy, dressed in white robes, the kind reserved for peace. Negotiations. He looked nervous. Arya emerged from the tree line, flanked by 2 of the largest apex hunters. Their presence made the envoy step back instinctively, but Arya kept walking until they stood face to face. The envoy swallowed hard. "The council wishes to discuss terms." Arya tilted her head. "Terms? You have destroyed a full assault regiment, Captain Vance. You command the loyalty of creatures thought to be untamable. This situation has unsettled the galaxy." Arya said nothing. The council believes it is in everyone's interest that the planet be recognized as a protected world, free from military interference. In return, you will. "I will do nothing for the council," she interrupted. Her voice was calm, but each word struck like steel on stone. "This world belongs to the hunters. They need no council to protect them. And they will have me until the day I die." The envoy hesitated. "Then the council will respect your claim." High in orbit, the fleet began to turn away, their massive engines igniting as they withdrew. For the hunters, life returned to its rhythm, hunting, guarding the jungle, protecting the ancient stone circle. But for Arya, this was only the beginning. She began to explore the far edges of the jungle with small teams of hunters, mapping hidden rivers, caves filled with glowing fungus, and ruins that whispered of civilizations far older than the galaxies. Current empires dot in those ruins. She found something dangerous, an ancient star map, carved into black crystal. It showed the galaxy, and hundreds of worlds marked with the same symbol as the hunter's fang. When she showed it to the leader, his response was simple: "We are not the only ones." The realization chilled her. The apex hunters were not a single species on a single world. They were guardians spread across the galaxy, each protecting something precious. And now she was one of them. Months later, a message reached her. Not a distress call, but a warning, intercepted from deep space. A warlord from the outer fringe was preparing to invade a world marked on the ancient map. It wasn't Earth, it wasn't her jungle, but it was one of theirs. That night, she stood in the stone circle. The hunters gathered around her. The leader approached and handed her the war spear tipped with black crystal. "You are ready," he said simply. Arya looked at the warriors before her, beings who once saw her as prey, now bound to her by respect and blood. "We leave at dawn," she said. When their fleet emerged from hyperspace above the threatened world, the warlord's ships moved to intercept. His voice boomed over the cones. "Leave or die." Arya's reply was calm, almost cold. "You've made a mistake. You're not facing a fleet. You're facing the apex." The battle that followed was short and brutal. The hunters' small, fast ships slipped past the warlord's heavy cruisers, striking like claws from the shadows. Boarding parties cut through bulkheads with silent efficiency. Entire crews vanished before alarms could be raised. When the smoke cleared, the warlord's flagship drifted powerless, its weapons ripped away. Arya stood on his bridge, the war spear in her hands. "You will tell the galaxy what you saw here," she said, "and you will tell them this. If you set foot on a world marked with the fang, you will not leave alive." By the time she returned to the jungle, her legend had already spread beyond the outer fringe. Stories were told in shadowed bars on mining colonies, in the mess halls of military stations, even in the polished chambers of the Grand Galactic Council. They said a human woman had tamed the deadliest hunters in the galaxy, that she commanded them as a queen commands her army, that she had made entire fleets vanish without